Sarah Mitchell stood in the hallway of Riverside Community Center, watching as a tall man with perfectly styled hair berated an elderly janitor. The old man, Carlos, clutched his mop handle with trembling hands while the younger man towered over him. "This floor is still wet, old man," the aggressor sneered. "I nearly slipped. Do you have any idea who I am?" Sarah had seen enough. She'd been coming to this community center in Cedar Falls, Iowa, for 3 weeks now, trying to blend into normal civilian life after 20 years in the Navy. She'd joined a book club, taken a pottery class, and kept mostly to herself. But this she couldn't ignore. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. She was 42 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair starting to show threads of gray. She stood 5'7", lean and fit, dressed in jeans and a simple blue sweater. Nothing about her appearance suggested her background. The tall man turned to face her. His black martial arts uniform, worn beneath an open jacket, displayed multiple patches and a black belt tied precisely at his waist. His name was Derek Chen, and Sarah had seen him around the center before. He ran a karate school in the building and seemed to believe that gave him authority over everyone. "This doesn't concern you," Derek said dismissively. "Actually it does," Sarah replied. "Carlos is doing his job. The sign says wet floor. You chose to walk through anyway." Derek's face flushed red. Several people had stopped to watch the confrontation. His students, young teenagers waiting for their next class, stood near the doorway to the gym. "Do you know who you're talking to?" Derek stepped closer to Sarah, using his height. He was at least 6'2" to try to intimidate her. "I'm a degree black belt. I've won regional championships. I teach discipline and respect." Sarah didn't move. "Then maybe you should practice what you teach." The words hung in the air. Derek's jaw clenched. Behind him, Carlos looked worried, shaking his head slightly at Sarah as if to say, "It's not worth it." "You've got some nerve, lady," Derek said. "I don't know who you think you are, coming to this town, acting like you can tell people what to do." "I'm just someone who doesn't like seeing people bullied," Sarah said quietly. Derek laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Bullied? I was pointing out incompetence. But since you want to get involved, let me educate you about respect." He gestured toward his belt. "This represents years of training, discipline, strength. What do you have? Middle-aged woman who probably does yoga twice a week." Sarah felt the familiar weight of her past pressing against her chest. She could tell him exactly what she had. She could describe the missions in places whose names were classified. She could explain about the training that made his martial arts school look like a playground. She could mention the commendations, the scars, the 20 years of service that had ended just 6 months ago. Instead, she said, "I have enough to know that real strength doesn't require putting down a man who's working hard to do an honest job." Derek's face contorted with anger. "You know what? I'm tired of newcomers in this town thinking they can waltz in and disrespect people who have built something here. My school has been part of Cedar Falls for 15 years. I've trained hundreds of students. I've given back to this community." He pointed at Carlos. "He's a janitor. I'm a professional martial artist and business owner. There's a hierarchy, and clearly you don't understand it." "I understand it just fine," Sarah said. "I just disagree with it." Several more people had gathered now. Martha Henderson, who ran the book club Sarah attended, stood watching with concern. Tom Bradley, a retired teacher who took the same pottery class, frowned at Derek's behavior. Derek noticed the growing audience and seemed to make a calculation. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Tell you what, since you're so confident, let me make you an offer. My school runs self-defense seminars for women, free community service." His tone dripped with condescension. "Why don't you come by tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock? I'll show you exactly what real training looks like. Maybe you'll learn some respect." It was a trap, Sarah knew. He wanted to embarrass her in front of an audience, to prove his point about hierarchy and respect. Every instinct told her to walk away. She'd spent 6 months trying to fade into civilian life, to be normal, to leave Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell behind and just be Sarah. But she looked at Carlos, still standing there with his head down, humiliated. She thought about how Derek probably treated everyone he considered beneath him. She remembered why she'd served in the first place, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. "I'll be there," she said. Derek's smile widened. "Excellent, don't worry, I'll go easy on you, wouldn't want to hurt someone's mother." He looked at her appraisingly. "Grandmother." "I'm 42, Sarah said evenly. "Well, I'll still be gentle, mostly." He turned to his students. "You kids will want to see this tomorrow. A real lesson in what happens when ego rights checks the body can't cash." The teenagers laughed nervously. Derek walked away, his bearing confident, his black belt swaying with each step. Martha hurried over to Sarah. "Oh, honey, you shouldn't have done that. Derek can be difficult, and he really is quite skilled at martial arts. I've seen him break boards with his bare hands." "I'll be fine," Sarah assured her. Tom joined them. Derek's been a problem for years. He's got friends on the city council. People are afraid to stand up to him because he makes their lives difficult. Last year, he got the funding cut for the senior center's lunch program because the director's daughter said something he didn't like. Sarah filed that information away. She helped Carlos finish mopping the floor, making small talk in Spanish, something else people in Cedar Falls didn't know about her. Carlos thanked her profusely, but his eyes were worried. "You should not have done that, Senora," he said softly. "Derek, he is a bad man, powerful in this town. He will hurt you tomorrow." "Don't worry about me, Carlos," Sarah said. "I've dealt with worse." That night in her small rental house on Elm Street, Sarah sat in her living room surrounded by moving boxes she still hadn't unpacked. She'd left the Navy for a lot of reasons. The nightmares, the feeling that she'd given enough, the desire for something like a normal life. But normal life, she was discovering, had its own battles, different from Fallujah or Kandahar, but battles nonetheless. She looked at the photo on her mantle, the only personal item she'd unpacked. It showed her younger self in dress whites standing between her parents at her commissioning ceremony. Both were gone now. Her father, a Marine veteran, had always told her, "Stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves." She tried to leave that part of herself behind, to just be a quiet new resident of Cedar Falls. But tomorrow, in Derek Chen's martial arts school, she'd have to make a choice. Let him humiliate her to keep her cover, or show him exactly what 20 years in naval special warfare had taught her. Sarah stood and walked to her bedroom closet. Behind her civilian clothes hung a garment bag she hadn't opened since moving to Cedar Falls. She unzipped it slowly. Inside was her dress uniform, her ribbons and medals carefully preserved. The trident gleamed even in the dim light, the special warfare insignia that marked her as one of the few women to have completed Bud S and served as a Navy SEAL. She zipped the bag closed. Tomorrow would be interesting. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah thought about the path that had led her here. Growing up in rural Minnesota, the daughter of a Marine and a nurse, joining the Navy at 22, determined to prove herself. The grueling months of basic underwater demolition SEAL training, where she'd been one of 3 women in her class and the only one to graduate. The deployments, the operations, the things she'd done that she could never talk about. And then 6 months ago, the mission that had ended it all. Not with glory, but with a quiet decision that her body and mind had given enough. Honorable discharge, full benefits, a chance at a normal life. Cedar Falls had seemed perfect. Small enough to be quiet, large enough to have amenities. Far from any ocean, far from her past. She'd planned to volunteer, maybe work part-time at the library, fade into comfortable anonymity. So much for that plan. Sarah fell asleep thinking about Derek's smug face and Carlos's frightened eyes. Tomorrow would either be the day she successfully blended into civilian life by taking an embarrassing defeat, or the day everyone in Cedar Falls learned that the quiet new woman in town was anything but ordinary. The next evening, Sarah arrived at Chen's Martial Arts Academy at 6:45. The building was a converted warehouse on the edge of downtown Cedar Falls, with large windows and a sign proclaiming "Building Champion since 2009." Inside, Derek had clearly prepared for a show. The main training area had been set up like a demonstration space, with chairs arranged along two walls. At least 50 people sat waiting: his students, their parents, and what looked like half the community center's regular visitors. Sarah recognized Martha, Tom, and even Carlos, who sat in the back row looking worried. Derek stood in the center of the mat, wearing a traditional gi. His black belt was tied with precise corners. Two of his senior students, both wearing brown belts, flanked him like bodyguards. "Ah, our volunteer arrives," Derek announced as Sarah walked in. She wore athletic pants and a plain gray t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. "I was worried you'd chickened out." "I said I'd be here," Sarah replied calmly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek addressed the crowd with the confidence of a showman, "tonight you'll witness an important lesson about the difference between confidence and competence. Our volunteer here, I'm sorry, I don't even know your name." "Sarah Mitchell." Sarah Mitchell decided yesterday that she knew better than someone with 15 years of martial arts experience. She defended incompetence and disrespected my authority. He smiled at the crowd. "But I'm a generous teacher. Tonight, I'm going to give Sarah a free lesson in self-defense. More importantly, I'm going to teach all of you about knowing your limitations." Sarah stepped onto the mat. She scanned the room with the situational awareness that had kept her alive in hostile territories. She noted the exits, the spacing of the crowd, the layout of the training area. Old habits. Derek gestured to the mat. "We'll start simple. Basic self-defense scenarios. Someone grabs your wrist, what do?" He reached out and grabbed Sarah's left wrist, his grip deliberately tight. Most untrained people would panic. They'd pull away, which doesn't work against a stronger opponent. The key is leverage and technique. He began to demonstrate a basic wrist release, moving slowly and explaining each step to the audience. Sarah could have escaped his grip in at least 5 different ways, 3 of which would have put him on the ground in under 2 seconds. Instead, she followed his instruction, playing the role of the inexperienced civilian. "See," Derek said to the crowd, "with proper training, even someone like Sarah could learn to defend herself. Of course, it takes years to develop real skill." He released her wrist. "Let's try something more challenging." For the next 20 minutes, Derek ran Sarah through increasingly complex scenarios, each time demonstrating the correct technique while subtly putting her in uncomfortable or slightly painful positions. A choke defense where he applied just a bit too much pressure. An arm lock that he held just a bit too long. The crowd watched, some looking uncomfortable, others clearly buying into his narrative of the expert teaching the novice. Sarah endured it all calmly. She could feel Derek's frustration growing. He'd expected her to quit, to show fear, to give him the satisfaction of complete dominance. Instead, she remained composed, following his instructions, never giving him the reaction he wanted. Finally, Derek decided to escalate. "All right, let's demonstrate something more realistic. In a real attack, you won't have time to think. Your opponent won't move slowly. You need reflexes that come from years of training." He turned to Sarah. "I'm going to come at you with a basic front kick. Your job is to try to block it. Don't worry, I'll pull the strike." He moved back into a fighting stance. Sarah remained standing normally, hands at her sides. "Ready?" Derek asked. Without waiting for an answer, he executed a fast front kick aimed at Sarah's midsection. Sarah's body reacted before her mind could overthink it. 20 years of training took over. She shifted slightly, let the kick pass within inches of her body, caught Derek's ankle, and executed a basic leg sweep that should have sent him to the mat. Should have. Sarah stopped herself mid-technique, releasing his ankle and stepping back. But Derek had already lost his balance. He stumbled, windmilling his arms, and fell hard on his backside. The room went silent. Derek's face turned crimson as he scrambled to his feet. You got lucky. A fluke. But his eyes showed something else now. Uncertainty. He'd felt how she'd caught his kick, how easily she'd controlled his momentum. "Let's go again," he said, his voice tight. "And this time I won't hold back." "Derek, maybe that's enough for tonight," Martha called from the audience. Several others murmured agreement. "No," Derek snapped. "She needs to understand what real skill looks like." He came at Sarah again, faster now, with a combination punch-kick sequence. Real speed, real power, the kind of attack that could hurt someone. Sarah could have ended it instantly. Could have used any of 100 techniques burned into her muscle memory through countless hours of training in close-quarters combat. But she'd come here to avoid revealing herself, to take her lumps and maintain her cover. Except now Derek was angry and moving with intent to harm. She saw it in his eyes, the desire to hurt her, to punish her for the perceived disrespect. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She slipped the punch, redirected the kick, stepped inside his guard and put Derek flat on his back with a basic hip throw. Nothing fancy. Nothing that screamed special operations. Just clean technique that any decent judoka could execute. Except she executed it perfectly. Derek hit the mat hard enough to knock the wind out of him. He lay there gasping, staring up at the ceiling, his face a mixture of shock and rage. Sarah stood over him, breathing normally, not even winded. "I think that's enough for tonight," she said quietly. Derek rolled to his feet, his face contorted with humiliation and anger. You sucker punched me. Dirty fighting. That's not proper martial arts." "You said to defend myself," Sarah replied. "I defended myself." "Who are you?" Derek demanded. "Where did you learn that?" Before Sarah could answer, a voice from the back of the room called out, "She's former military. I knew I recognized her." Everyone turned. A man in his 60s stood up, wearing a navy ball cap. His name was Robert Hayes, and Sarah had seen him at the library but never spoken to him. "I was at the ceremony at Norfolk 6 months ago," Robert continued. "My grandson was graduating from basic. You were there receiving some kind of commendation, high-level stuff. They didn't announce details, but I remember thinking, now there's a real warrior." The room erupted in whispers. Derek looked from Robert to Sarah, his expression morphing from anger to calculation. "Military," he said slowly. "So what? I have a black belt in 3 different disciplines. I've trained with champions. What did you do, some basic hand-to-hand in boot camp?" Sarah considered her options. She could still downplay it, make up something about being a clerk or a mechanic, keep her secrets, maintain her quiet life. Or she could stand up for herself, really stand up the way she'd stood up for Carlos. "I was in the Navy for 20 years, Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying through the silent room. "I did a lot of things I can't talk about, but yes, I had some training." "Some training," Derek mocked. "Lady, I've been doing this since I was 6 years old. You think a few military courses compare to a lifetime of—" "I'm a Navy SEAL," Sarah said flatly. The room went absolutely silent. Derek's mouth hung open. Even his students looked shocked. "You're lying," Derek finally said. "Women can't be SEALs." "Women can be SEALs since 2016, Robert called out. "And she's the real deal. I didn't know the details, but I asked around after that ceremony. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, 20 years of service, decorated veteran." Derek's face cycled through several emotions: disbelief, fear, humiliation, and finally settling on desperate anger. "I don't care what you claim to be. This is my school, my town. You came here and disrespected me, and now you're making up stories too." "I'm not making up anything," Sarah interrupted. "And I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came here to live quietly. You're the one who made this a confrontation." "Get out," Derek said, his voice shaking. "Get out of my school." Gladly, Sarah turned to leave. "This isn't over," Derek called after her. You think you can come into my town and embarrass me? I have friends, I have influence. You'll regret this." Sarah paused at the door and looked back. "I defended an old man doing his job. Then I accepted your challenge and showed up. You're the one who escalated this. If you want it to be over, then let it be over." She walked out into the cool evening air, hearing the eruption of conversation behind her as the door swung closed. Part 3. The next morning, Sarah woke to find her quiet life in Cedar Falls completely upended. Her phone, which rarely rang, had 17 missed calls. There were cars parked outside her house. When she peeked through the curtains, she saw people with cameras. Local news had somehow gotten the story. Former Navy SEAL living in Cedar Falls read the headline on her phone's news app. The article was surprisingly detailed, citing unnamed sources who confirmed she'd been part of Naval Special Warfare Command and had served multiple combat deployments. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching her privacy evaporate. This was exactly what she'd wanted to avoid. She'd moved to Cedar Falls to disappear, to heal, to be normal. Her phone rang again. This time she answered. "Sarah Mitchell," a woman's voice asked. "This is Jennifer Walsh from the Cedar Falls Gazette. I was hopping to ask you a few questions about your service and what brought you to our town." "No comment," Sarah said and hung up. But the calls kept coming. Other veterans wanting to meet her, organizations asking her to speak, the local VFW post inviting her to their next meeting. It was overwhelming. By noon, someone knocked on her door. Sarah considered ignoring it, but the knocking persisted. She looked through the peephole and saw Carlos, holding his cleaning supplies and looking worried. She opened the door. "Senora Sarah," Carlos said quickly, "I am so sorry. I should not have let you defend me. Now you have all this trouble because of me." "Carlos, this isn't your fault. Come in, please." The old man stepped inside hesitantly. "I just came to clean the house next door, but I saw all these people, the news trucks. I asked what happened and they told me." He shook his head. "A Navy SEAL. I had no idea. I thought you were just a kind woman." "I am just a kind woman," Sarah said gently. "The other stuff is just what I used to do. Derek is telling everyone you attacked him, that you used military tactics to assault a civilian. He is saying you are dangerous." Sarah sighed. She'd expected something like this. "What else is he saying?" "He filed a police report, claims you hurt him, says your military training makes you a weapon and that you should be arrested for using it against him." Carlos wrung his hands. "I know this is not true. I was there last night. Everyone saw he challenged you, but Derek has friends in the police department. His uncle is on the city council." "Thank you for telling me, Carlos." "There is something else." Carlos reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I was not going to show anyone, but now I think you should see." He handed her the paper. It was a printout of an email chain between Derek Chen and other local business owners. The emails discussed dealing with various people who'd crossed Derek, getting health inspections called on restaurants, having business licenses held up, even coordinating negative online reviews. It was a systematic campaign of harassment against anyone Derek viewed as a threat. "Where did you get this?" Sarah asked. "Derek throws many papers in the trash at the community center. I empty his office garbage. Usually I do not look, but after yesterday I wondered." Carlos looked ashamed. "I know it is wrong to read other people's trash." "No, Carlos, this is important. This shows a pattern of behavior." Sarah studied the emails. Several mentioned Carlos himself, discussions about trying to get him fired for incompetence. Another knock at the door. This time it was Robert Hayes, the veteran who'd recognized her. "Commander Mitchell," he said formally, "may I come in?" Sarah invited him in and introduced him to Carlos. Robert got straight to the point. "Derek's stirring up trouble. He's claiming you assaulted him and that the Navy must have taught you to be violent. He's playing the victim." Robert's jaw was tight with anger. "I've lived in Cedar Falls for 40 years. Derek's been a cancer in this town for a long time. He uses his martial arts school as a way to build influence and intimidate people. His students' parents are afraid to cross him. He's got connections to half the small business owners and a third of the city council." "I just wanted a quiet life," Sarah said. "I know, and I'm sorry this happened, but—" Robert leaned forward. "Maybe this is a chance to do something good. Derek needs to be stopped, and now everyone knows you're here. You can't go back to being invisible, so maybe you go forward instead." Over the next few days, Sarah found herself in a position she'd never anticipated. The story of the Navy SEAL who'd stood up to the local bully had captured people's imagination. Other victims of Derek's harassment started coming forward, sharing their stories. The restaurant owner who'd been driven out of business. The teenager who'd quit Derek's martial arts school after being bullied and then finding herself blackballed from other activities. The families who'd paid for lessons their children were too afraid to attend. The police investigation into Sarah went nowhere. Too many witnesses confirmed Derek had challenged her and that she'd acted in self-defense. But the investigation inadvertently revealed Derek's pattern of filing false complaints against people he didn't like. Meanwhile, Carlos's discovery of the emails provided documentation of Derek's systematic harassment. When the local newspaper got hold of them, through an anonymous tip, the story exploded beyond just Sarah. The city council called an emergency meeting. Derek appeared, defiant and angry, claiming the emails were taken out of context, but victim after victim stood up to testify about his behavior. And when Derek tried to use his martial arts credentials to claim authority, Robert Hayes stood up. "I'd like to invite Commander Mitchell to speak," Robert said. Sarah hadn't planned to attend the meeting. She'd watched it on the local cable access channel from her living room, still hopping to avoid the spotlight. But Martha Henderson had anticipated this and was waiting outside Sarah's house with a car. "Time to finish what you started," Martha said simply. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood at the podium in the Cedar Falls City Council chambers, looking at the faces of her adopted hometown. Derek sat in the front row, his expression hostile. "I didn't come to Cedar Falls to be a hero," Sarah began. "I came here to retire quietly, to recover from 20 years of service and find some peace. I wanted to be normal." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I learned something this week. Normal doesn't mean ignoring injustice. It doesn't mean letting bullies operate unchecked because confronting them is inconvenient. I spent 20 years defending people in other countries. It would be pretty hypocritical if I wasn't willing to stand up for my neighbors here at home." Derek stood up. "This is ridiculous. You attacked me." "Sit down, Mr. Chen," the council president said firmly. "You'll have your turn to speak." Sarah continued. "Derek challenged me to come to his school. He wanted to embarrass me in front of a crowd because I'd defended Carlos Martinez, a hardworking janitor who Derek decided to humiliate. When his demonstration didn't go the way he planned, he got violent. I defended myself using minimal force. Everything that happened was witnessed by 50 people." She pulled out the emails Carlos had found. "But this isn't really about one incident. It's about a pattern of abuse that's been allowed to continue because people were afraid of retaliation, afraid of someone with connections and influence. That's not the kind of town I want to live in. And based on the people who have spoken here tonight, it's not the kind of town you want either." The council meeting lasted another 2 hours. By the end, Derek's business license was suspended pending a full investigation. Several council members he'd counted on as allies publicly distanced themselves. His martial arts school would remain closed until the investigation concluded. Derek left the meeting in fury, shouting threats that he'd sue everyone involved. But his power, built on intimidation and fear, had been broken by exposure to light. 3 months later, Sarah sat in the refurbished community center. now renamed the Martinez Community Center in honor of Carlos, who'd been promoted to head of facilities management. The center had new programs, including a self-defense class taught by Sarah herself. Not for profit, not for ego, but as genuine community service. Her class was full of people of all ages learning practical safety skills. She taught them not just techniques, but confidence. The knowledge that strength doesn't come from putting others down, but from building yourself and others up. Derek's martial arts school had permanently closed. He'd left Cedar Falls entirely after multiple lawsuits from former students and business owners. The building that had housed his academy was now home to a community gym, open to everyone regardless of ability to pay. Sarah never did achieve the invisible quiet life she'd originally wanted. Instead, she'd become a respected member of the community. She joined the VFW post. She volunteered with at-risk youth. She gave occasional talks at schools about service and standing up for others. One evening, as she locked up the community center after her class, Carlos approached her. He was wearing a new uniform, no longer a janitor's coveralls, but the neat polo shirt and slacks of a facilities manager. "Senora Sarah," he said, "I wanted to thank you again. Not just for defending me that day, but for showing me that speaking up matters. I spent 30 years keeping my head down, trying not to make trouble. But you taught me that sometimes making the right kind of trouble is exactly what's needed." Sarah smiled. "You taught me something too, Carlos. I thought I was done serving. I thought I'd given enough. But service isn't something you retire from. It just takes different forms." She looked back at the community center, where lights glowed warmly and people of all ages were gathering for evening programs. This wasn't the peace she'd imagined when she left the Navy. It was better. It was purpose. It was home. Besides, Sarah added with a slight grin, someone had to show that black belt bully what real strength looks like. Carlos laughed. "You certainly did that, Commander." "Just Sarah," she corrected gently. "The commander retired. Sarah is who stays." But as she walked home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls that evening, Sarah knew that all the parts of herself, the warrior, the protector, the neighbor, the friend, were finally integrated. She didn't have to choose between them anymore. She'd come to Cedar Falls seeking peace and found purpose instead. And in defending a janitor from a bully, she discovered that the battles worth fighting aren't always the ones in far-off places. Sometimes the most important fight is standing up for what's right in your own backyard. The black belt bully had challenged her, thinking he knew exactly who she was, just another middle-aged woman he could intimidate. He never imagined she was a Navy SEAL, but more importantly, he never imagined she was someone who'd spent her whole life protecting people who needed protecting.